The day before I was to leave for Harvard, I was picking up my mom from work when the secretary of the elementary school explained to me how Ama had finally accepted that I would be leaving. Ama, being the lunch lady, was sitting in the school cafeteria during her lunch break between the breakfast and lunch shifts when the secretary walked in. Ama was wearing her hairnet and a work apron over her usual flower-patterned blouse. She sat on a plastic school lunch bench in the middle of the cold, drab concrete room, all alone, and she was crying with her head between her hands. Shocked, the secretary asked my mom, "Esperanza, why are you crying? Are you okay?" "Es que mi hijo, primero lo perdí a las drogas, luego se me fue para Berkeley, y ahora se me va a una escuela en Boston que se llama Harvard. ¿Por qué no se regresa aquí a estudiar para estar cerca de la familia? Aquí está la mejor universidad en San Diego. Hace mucho frío allá y se me puede enfermar." Ama was pleading in Spanish that why didn't I come home and go to school to be close to the family? I mean, the best university is in San Diego, and it's too cold over there in Boston. I might get sick. The secretary hugged Ama while she sobbed and asked her, "What school did you say your son is going to?" Harvard, se llama Harvard, in Boston. Only God knows where Boston is. They tell me it's super far, near Nueva York. ¿Usted se imagina Nueva York? The secretary held her by the shoulders, looked at her tear-covered face, and directly into her eyes and said, "Are you kidding? It's Harvard." The secretary went directly to the teacher's lounge and wrote on the board, "Please congratulate Esperanza. Her son just got accepted to Harvard." And so everyone did. Teacher after teacher, and even the principal came to congratulate Ama that day. Her tears of sadness turned into tears of joy. She looked up to these teachers, and she finally began to understand that Harvard was one of the most prestigious schools in the world, and her son, who she had sacrificed so much for, was going to be attending Harvard University. So, I'd love to ask you all to take a moment and think back to when you were 10 years old. When you were 11, what did you look like? What was your hairstyle like? What were you wearing? The summer between 6th and 7th grade? Because I was a loving, nerdy kid. Still is nerd. My older brother calls me nerd. My best friend calls me nerd. When she's nerd, I had hair parted on the side. I had really bad eyesight on one eye, so back then we didn't have these hipsters wearing these thick frame glasses, and so they sat. Cyclops, but nerd stuck. And I would go to the library and I would check out a National Geographic magazine. And then I'd get an encyclopedia that matched whatever was on the cover of the National Geographic magazine. And for those of you that are too young to know what an encyclopedia is, it's Google, but on paper. And I would sit in the living room floor in our tiny two-bedroom apartment, and I would get lost in these worlds. I'd be researching the underground cities, Turkey and Cappadocia, or the history of the pyramids of Mexico, wondering if one day I would be able to travel to these places. And my mom loved me. She would be in the kitchen cooking, making salsa or handmade tortillas, and I'd go help her. But then when I found out Linda Carter was Mexican, I would watch the Wonder Woman episode, and I would spin around in circles, praying that I would become like Wonder Woman, right? I didn't like Batman. I didn't like Superman. I used to love Wonder Woman. I wanted to be Linda Carter. And then one day, it's a hot summer day in San Diego. We're having a water bucket fight, and we're wetting each other with the water hose in the little apartments and the projects, and they send me to go to the store to buy water balloons. So I get on my bike, and I'm super proud. They asked me, they asked the nerd, man. They put their money together. I have it in my pocket, and I'm gonna go buy water balloons because they're trusting me. So I go to Safeway, and they don't have any water balloons. And the guy tells me, go down the street to a gift shop. And I go to this gift shop. And I walk in, and I'm like, excuse me, sir, do you have any water balloons? He says, yeah, they're in the back storage room. Feel free to go back there and grab them. I'm going to take care of these customers. I'll be with you in a minute. So I'm in this back storage room, and I see these sealed boxes, and my mama raised me right. She told me I can't open anything I wasn't given permission to open, and I'm looking, and I can't find these water balloons, and I want to go ask the shopkeeper for permission to open up a box. And, minutes go by, and when I go to ask, I turn around, and he's standing in the doorway. I get sexually abused, get physically beaten up. I get threatened that if I don't go back, he's gonna find out where I live and kill me and kill my family. And I believed him. About a month into it, he started inviting other men to the store. And I'm just this little loving, nerdy, caring kid. And I blamed myself. I blamed Jesse. I blamed me. Maybe if I didn't spin around like Wonder Woman, maybe if I was more masculine like my brother, maybe if I knew how to throw a football and was like ripped like my older brother was, maybe this wouldn't have happened to me. And I blamed my mom for loving me. So I changed. I changed everything about me, vowing to never let this 11-year-old kid ever out again. So at 14, this is me, going on 15. Angry, I went shoplifting, I bought some Dickies, I creased them out. I went to Kmart and I stole these slippers we call pantuflas, the corduroy black slippers, wearing fake Pendletons, hairnets, training my hair to go back. How I stood changed, how I talked changed. What's up, Holmes? And all the while making my mom's life hell. She didn't understand what was happening with me. At 14, the authorities got involved. I got in a fight at school. I reached out for help, and I was placed in the victim witness program back then, which is the compensation program for victims of crimes in California. And I was placed with a therapist. The therapist did nothing to help me or to help my family. She never recommended drug and alcohol treatment. My perpetrators were drugging me. There's a whole bunch of contradictions about the right terminology to use. The individuals that caused me sexual harm were drugging me, so at 14 years old, I was already a drug addict. So when the authorities got involved and my perpetrators disappeared, I turned to the streets and the commercial sexual exploitation of the streets to support my drug habit. At 16, I ran away from home. I'm walking Santa Monica Boulevard, Hollywood Boulevard, and at 18, I ended up homeless, weighing 135 pounds, sleeping under a bush in Balboa Park, next to the famous San Diego Zoo. And that's how I ended up. At 18, 135 pounds. I'm strung out. I'm that kid. I'm that uncle. I'm that brother. We all have that brother, that cousin, that uncle, that person in the family, that friend that you just think they're never gonna get it. Oh my God, Jesse's gonna die. That was me. So at 18, I walked into my very first 12-step recovery meeting. There weren't many young people of color trying to get clean and sober, and definitely not from the barrio. But something stuck. And all these people in recovery taught me that I could change therapists. See, no one from the state followed up with me or my family. No one told me or my mom that we could change therapists. No one followed up and said, Señora León, how's your son doing? Is he doing okay? When my mom would reach out to organizations begging for help because I'm just running amok, no one knew where to point her to help little Jessie. At 18, I got clean and sober. I changed therapists. I started in community college. It took me 4 years to get my associate's degree. It's not a race. I did cosmetology for 1 year. Became an expert at black hair. Cornrows, updos, extensions, pineapple waves, flat iron. It took me 4 years to get my associate's degree, and eventually I transferred and got a full ride to UC Berkeley. And I was able to study abroad and go to these places that I would only read in National Geographic magazines. I'm able to walk in the underground cities of Turkey and Cappadocia, and I'm able to take photos in front of the Eiffel Tower and go check out the pyramids in Mexico. And then I get a full ride to Harvard, Kennedy School of Government. There was no LCHT available when I was growing up. See, in my hometown of San Diego, the FBI ranks it 13th in the country for human trafficking with up to 8,000 victims per year. What they don't talk about, and the data's all over the place because there's no real concrete data, that up to 50% of trafficked children in the US are boys. I was meeting with people yesterday over dinner here in Denver, and the unaccompanied minors that are being targeted right now is huge, boys and girls alike. I often sit back and I think, what did I need when I was 11 years old? What did I need when I was 14 years old? What did I need when I was 18? Now as an adult, I'm an advocate for culturally responsive or culturally humble, multilingual, gender-affirming access to mental health services and care. And it's never easy. I'm seeing Javier, and I'm listening to him share, and I remember the day we met, and I remember being in Miami, wearing my business suit and representing the JP Morgan Chase Foundation, and it's not like I can just walk up and say, hey, I'm a survivor, how about you? I don't think you realize, hermano, what sometimes that simple pat on the back, what that means. Hey, Jesse, I'm thinking of you, how you doing? When somebody says, hey, are you doing okay? So before I wrap up and we get into Q&A, the reason I wrote my memoir, I'm Not Broken, is because for too long I felt invisible. I felt that my story was never being told. And there were so many men that would approach me and say, me too. And so I need to hear this. So if you don't mind looking to the person next to you or behind you or the group sitting with you, please repeat after me and tell them, you matter. You're not alone. And I believe in you. See, people believed in me. And that's the only way I was able to go from being this lost, nerdy kid to weighing 135 pounds, sleeping under a bush in a park, hopping in and out of random people's cars to support my habit, to getting a master's degree from Harvard and being able to do the work that I do today to try to change lives of others, is because other people believed in me. There are people like Javier in my life and people like LCHT that provide spaces for kids like me to have a future. So thank you for allowing me to be here today.
Good evening, everybody. I'm AJ Alejano Steele, and as the co-founder and research director of LCHT, I have the distinct honor of being able to sit with Jesse and ask just a few questions, knowing that you'll be able to also answer questions as you sit with the books in the back of the room. So as I listen to you courageously share and reflect on this journey and revisit your younger self, are there prevention efforts that were missing then that you can share? How might we be able to better see youth like you? What would it have meant for your younger self to have had resources like organizations like LCHT, if you think back?
I often wonder, what would I have been like had resources been available for me or my family so that, we didn't have non-gender binary, we didn't have different identities, I didn't know what I was. I was a child. And then being raised in the barrio, and everything was either gay, straight, or bi. And no one from my community, at least from the barrio and the environment that surrounded me, I didn't see that on TV. I didn't see those kinds of gay people, for example. And I was like, I didn't know where I fit. And so I often think back, and that's why I fight for gender-affirming, multilingual, culturally responsive, trauma-informed care. And I would argue that today, we still don't have good follow-through for families. For me, I'm considered a success story. That's the funny part. At 14, I was considered a success story. I was rescued. That was the term. They placed me into state-mandated therapy. They provided the resources for me. So anything that happened after that is basically your fault and your family's fault for not knowing how to help you. Even though my mom begged the therapist for help, even though my mom was going to nonprofits for help, so I would still argue that we need better follow through. One, we need data. Yep. We need research. Yes. We need research to be funded. We need individuals with lived experiences to be hired as paid experts when conducting research, analyzing research, to be at the table. And I'm probably one of a handful of survivors that gets asked to go to DC. I do consulting for Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, Department of Education. I review protocols. I argue for multilingual services so that families like mine don't fall through the cracks. But I may be one of maybe 8 or 10. Okay. And so I would argue that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and we've made some progress. At least there's organizations like LCHT. This was a dream of mine. It shouldn't have taken me to write a book, to be at the policy table trying to create policies. I was begging, I was working for the federal government in DC, working at a specific agency, and I wanted to leave to go to a different agency. And because I didn't have the background in, I'm not a LCSW, I'm not a trained therapist, a lot of the jobs for survivors, I was being bypassed and overlooked because they weren't taking the lived experience into account. And I would say that that is somewhat changing now.
Right. Thanks, Jesse. I also appreciated you sharing some of the challenges that come along with immigrant identity. The story of your family, and particularly your mom, resonates with me as you and I share the experience of toggling two cultures growing up. There are clear cultural expectations for immigrants struggling to assimilate here in the United States. And in my family's experience, the level of dependency on people that they didn't know and had to learn how to trust in the United States was so complicated. So for a time that they were at the mercy of people that they didn't know very well, and they had to balance this dependency with their own cultural expectation, In this case, it was a difficult combination of submission, dutiful service, and Catholicism. This is in my family. And for many immigrants in the Philippines, that means we exist to serve others, to provide for our families. So messy, so complicated. And that we're taught not to voice our complaints, don't draw attention to ourselves. Silent obedience is baked into our cultural DNA. So are there elements that I'm sharing here that might resonate or differ for you about the immigrant experience and risk and resilience to trafficking?
Oh, wow. Risk and resilience. Yes, thank you. And I talked about it in my book, how Mexican culture is the only culture that uses the word mande. It literally translates to order me. We don't say que, which means what. We're the only culture that says order me. When I introduce myself to someone as a child, Jesse León para servirle. Jesse León a su servicio. Jesse León here to serve you. Jesse León at your service. And when we say, and it's really not mande, the appropriate term is mándeme usted. Order me, sir or madam. That's where the term comes from. And so for a long time after, being at UC Berkeley and studying, race, class, gender, sexuality, I'm rebelling, I'm organizing with Angela Davis, on prison industry, and I refuse to use the word mande. But in my family, it's seen as a term of disrespect. How dare me respond with que to my mom, to my aunt, to my family members. And so the subservient attitude is so deeply ingrained, on top of my mom was reaching out for help, but didn't know what to reach out for help with. She thought it was the drugs and the gang violence. They just told her on the reports that I was sexually abused. I was molested. They didn't talk about the trafficking. And so in Spanish, we don't have a word for molest. Molest means molestar. Molestar means to bother. So I'm a 14-year-old kid trying to tell my mom in our language, me están molestando. And she's like, who's bothering you? And I'm like, Mom, me están molestando sexualmente. And she still doesn't get it until finally the light bulb just went on, right? And so I think we need to be very cognizant of how we address program services, how we market our programs, how we do outreach, and how we let the community know that our services are available. It's my understanding that LCHT is doing an amazing job at the homeless shelters. And they have translators going out there to help individuals know what their rights are, especially when we are at risk of being, legal term, victims of human trafficking, both labor and sexual.
We'll have time for one more question, even though we could spend all evening here together, because you have been amazing in sharing your enduring resilience, and you've come such a long way in your growth. That's so powerful and important for us to hear. And truly, Jesse, making the choice to be involved in this movement is so significant, and that's one thing that not everyone easily makes. So how has your healing journey enabled you to sustain your work in our shared anti-trafficking efforts?
Wow. And you played a big role earlier tonight. Thank you for being there and for hearing me out. We spoke earlier, and it's real easy for me to want to just walk out that door, get back on a plane, go home, be the Harvard, UC Berkeley, UPenn graduate, working in philanthropy, It's not easy. And I would also argue it's not easy from a male perspective. You know, I want to be one of the bros. I mean, I don't, but you know what I mean. I want to be liked. And sometimes people read the book that have known me and they don't know how to respond. I'm still Jesse. I'm just blessed to have been able to be in positions as an adult where I have surrounded myself by a community of people, for me at least in recovery, and that loved me unconditionally and believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I couldn't articulate myself the way I do now. Everything was my head down, my beanie down to my nose. What's up? No. Sub Holmes. That's how I spoke. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, like, my vocabulary was very limited. And I was always keeping people at bay. But it was people that came into my life that told me that's why it's important for me to hear, like, hey, I believe in you. You're not alone. You do matter, Jesse. Because I know I'm not the only one. And my mama taught me. My mom was PTA president and didn't speak a word of English. She volunteered at our school. She became the lunch lady to keep an eye on us. So she taught us that even in her way, she planted a seed of an education, and for me to be able to give back. And if not me, then who? I know what it's like to feel alone and invisible in a corporate boardroom, in the office. I'm living here in Denver. And I lived here for a year. And I don't know, I'm having a bad day. You don't know, you're my boss, and maybe the guy right there in the striped, Adidas jacket with the baseball cap reminds me of somebody from my childhood. I have a memory. And all of a sudden, I'm going through my range of emotions, and I have a meeting with you as my supervisor. But I'm being distant, I'm being short, and you don't take the time to ask, hey, what's happening with you today? Are you doing okay? Do you want to take a minute and just take a walk for a bit? Immediately, as a man of color, I have a deep voice, I speak with my hands, I move my head a lot. I'm already intimidating when I walk into a room because I know what I represent to others. So very few people take the time to look beyond the face. And so for me, mental health is such a huge thing for me. One of the things that I'm really trying to do, I get phone calls, I get emails from people that have read my memoir, Latino, African American, Asian men, Native men, saying, hey, I'm a survivor and I'm looking for a therapist and I can't find one that I feel understands my culture. I'm just me. I don't run a big nonprofit. So I'm trying to find people resources, but then you research trauma-informed, bilingual, Spanish-speaking mental health therapists that understand, we'll just say EMDR, parts work, internal family systems, CBT or DBT, these are all different mental health modalities, to find someone that is trained and also bilingual and also knows how to work with individuals in a trauma-informed way is so hard to find. And it's really difficult. I've been able to do most of my healing because I combine my mental health therapy with Native American sweat lodge, with Native American traditions and ceremonies. I can go to a Muslim mosque, a Jewish synagogue, a Buddhist temple, a Catholic church, any place of worship, and I feel at home. But my mom has played a big part in that role for me. So being in some kind of ceremony helps me kind of ground myself so that when I'm meeting with a therapist, I'm able to at least access certain memories and know that I'm not alone. And I don't even know if that answered your question, but I hope it did.
Thank you, absolutely.
So please join me in supporting organizations like LCHT. They weren't around when I was a kid. It shouldn't take me at 49 years old to be maybe one of 3 male survivor authors that are out there. Yeah. And when you start talking of males of color, it's even harder to find. And so I believe in you. And thanks for believing in me.